Rarely.
During college, I felt like I always reliably got sick during my breaks. It was like I had been, I don't know, running on stress. I don't even remember ever being like that stressed though. But I was just like running on fumes, and then as soon as I had a break, I would crash.
Yeah, you have like the time to actually engage with the buildup of fatigueness. Yeah. I'm really curious what's going to happen this summer. I still have some hope that I could get into the Disney program, the diverse intelligences group. I'm kind of glad at least I got waitlisted, which is something that hasn't happened before. And for better or worse, I feel like it's entirely because I'm a grad student now, which is like cool, but also like it's just other people saying, hey, you can take these courses, like nothing else has changed, but that's how it goes, you know.
Like, yeah, it seems like nothing substantive had changed.
Yeah. Although to be fair, like I'm definitely a better applicant than I've ever been. Like I think given the experiences I've had and like what I'm doing like in work and kind of outside the lab, I think that is a net factor, but it just feels like it's just like you know, especially I think this particular program is almost like underrated and not really like nobody knows what it is unless you're familiar with the space, but it's still really hard to do. And I think it's just an amazing program. From what I heard from like Jenny about it and the speakers that have been there, you know, so we'll see. I'm not really expecting it, but like if that happens this summer, it'll definitely change some things. Because that kind of, I think unlike like neuromatch, I could kind of work around and do things. I don't think I could. I think I would basically take a leave of absence from some things at the time, but that's I think somewhat unlikely, unfortunately. So my current availability is unchanged, outside of the fact that I'm much more physically available today than I was yesterday. I was telling Amanda it's been so disappointing because it was like really nice here in Boston for 3 days and like blue skies after like second and third winter. Yeah, okay, I guess we can begin with the stuff. I may be able to still share my screen.
Okay.
Yeah. I did get it here, but if you still want to find your stuff, you can.
Yeah, let's just maybe start at the top of the Notion page. And I don't want to like repeat things we've already said, but we can like maybe go through and see if there's anything to elaborate on.
Okay.
Because I know one of the meetings, essentially, I was only there for half of it, and Bradley was only there for half of it.
Yeah.
I think that those notes were basically around here. So right after I started taking notes basically after after this sort of intro section.
I guess so. Starting at the very top, I haven't been good about using this, but I added a bunch of concepts from our concept library that seemed maybe
nice.
like more loosely connected than others, but might as well like make the connection.
Yeah.
Project status, does that mean like reading, like have we read the paper, have we finished the paper?
In
progress, because we're working on the paper, but I didn't know if project was what you had in mind for that.
Yeah, this because this is in the database that it's in, I would say that's the correct one. Yeah, that's fine. This is just a loose. This is a very generic status feature. So that's fine. I could go into the weeds about some other things I'm working on doing, but that's fine for now. So yeah, that's good.
yeah, I just wanted to try to utilize these categories, and I did put
That's cool.
a PDF
Yeah,
file.
that's great. And I like, the table of contents here is good. Yeah, great. Okay. Did you want to talk about any of these concepts or just sort of mention them?
I guess maybe the loosest is energetics. I don't remember
Mhm.
exactly what we were talking about. Like, I guess I don't know exactly what that means. Um, so I don't remember who added it or in what context. But if you guys do, I'd love to. Oh, great. We actually.
Okay.
Oh no, that's just the
Nothing
template. Okay.
here, but it is mentioned in brain energetics.
Okay. So it was tied to a particular paper.
Oh, this one.
If you had looked at it last year, apparently. I don't remember very much this paper.
How's the Saturday meeting?
Mm.
Looks like it could be.
Because I remember kind of going over this or something similar. So connection is
Yeah,
brain
it was in.
energetics. Yeah,
It was in a Saturday meeting.
yeah, 2023.
Us using Notion the way it should be.
Yeah, all right, yeah.
I guess I thought maybe it was connected because one of the main themes of the relevance realization paper is that there's a hierarchy of levels and like biological self-maintenance or whatever has like everything to do with cognition and consciousness. So if energetics, I guess what I had in mind was like, yeah, bioenergetics, like the energy demands and dynamics in the body, then that would be relevant to this. The rest are maybe more obvious. Predictive processing gets a mention. I don't know if I didn't like go through the whole concept library, so there are probably others that would be relevant. But again, the anticipation in Rosen's sense is something that is interesting to me. That was one thing that was discussed in this paper.
Oh, yeah. Could we create an anticipation or like a concept library for, I guess, anticipatory systems, maybe?
It might already.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's as a concept, but I think that the text maybe has a page already, if only a stub.
Okay, so can we, how do we add it in, like in the concept library?
For which one? I'm sorry.
Anticipatory systems.
Let's see. Here it comes.
There we go. All right.
Awesome.
It's not showing up here, but that's okay.
Here it is.
Excuse me.
Cool. Yeah, it looks like in the reference library, there's also a stub template for the text. And Robert Rosen has a stub. So I don't know, even if a lot of these things remain stubs, it's nice to have these connections.
Yeah, I hope that we can expand, like we can go and talk more about how Rosen envisioned the systems. And then I think last time we talked about two different types of systems. The MR system, which is metabolism repair. Got balloons in front of me. And I can't remember the other one, but we had like examples, and I'd actually kind of like to get into that a little bit at some point. Maybe next time we meet, kind of work through some of the examples and see how they work, and what the, because people keep mentioning it, but like it's nice to go over kind of what those are and how they work.
Yeah, I think that would be a great thing for the next meeting.
Do we know, just as a organizing thing, is Anticipatory Systems the title of a specific book or paper by Rosen?
It's like a book, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of the book, but it's 1985 or something like that. And, yeah, well, it's a book. I don't know if it's a title.
I'll just say 1985. So, book. There we go.
The only book on anticipatory systems. That's
Actually, I
fun.
think it's probably true, but yeah.
Well, if you just invent your own thing. 1985.
Okay.
But maybe there's a paper version of specifically the metabolism repair concept that we could find for next time.
Yeah.
This is a tangent also, and I don't really want to blow up anything with this. Let's just mention. I'll lift these out here. What did you want to look at specifically? Metabolism or something?
There's a
Metabolism repair.
yeah. There's an M comma R. That's the way the notation is. Yeah, metabolism repair. So it's like, yeah, M comma R, which is metabolism and repair. And there's another type of system we talked about last week, which I can't remember, but it was someone else actually who followed up on that. So there's a method of anticipatory systems. We're talking about these spirals in the paper here that they show, and those spirals represent like these two processes that kind of link together. And so I guess theoretically in an anticipatory system, you can build a spiral out of any two things if they are linked like that. So then the question is like, what are the other types of systems? So I know that we talked last week about one, and I can't remember what it is. But there are probably others that we could like identify, which would be kind of interesting. I don't know. Yeah, if we have the notes from last time, I can find it real quick. Easier to search your commas. I don't know.
Continuity. Yeah, I don't know where.
Yeah, well, I can find it later and put it in there. But,
Okay. We talked about emergence in relation to computation.
I may have put it in my notes actually, so I don't know if it'll be here. But
okay.
I have some thoughts that are towards the end of the Notion document that we don't need to rush to. But when I was scrolling through it, I remembered most of this stuff in our notes, and I don't necessarily have anything to add to it. I guess if there's nothing notable that happened in the meeting that I actually missed. But I guess that was like a month ago now.
Honestly, it was kind of just going over the same. We both basically stopped around the same point of like wading through. The first bit was just Yogi kind of situating his disagreements with the pan computationalists and whatnot. So it wasn't anything groundbreaking. I mean, there's some comments that came up, but I don't think there's anything critical that comes out. I'll think about it.
So if I remember correctly, we were talking about that distinction he's making. Pan-computationalism is incomplete or irrelevant to life or something. And then did we come to the conclusion that maybe that was overblown, or I can't remember.
Like his general thing, and he kind of breaks it down in this part here, but he's making these camps of like the groups of people that are, how do people see agency, right? And some people see it as distinct from cognition. Some people see it as to be the same thing, which is interesting because he puts Macharan and Roland here too. Leon, who I'm not familiar with as much, Thompson, and then Levin, and he, Levin's sort of is sort of the I think person he's targeting is being against here because they're saying it's the same thing, right? Yeah, here, and it's codified in the strong or physical church-Turing conjecture, etc. And 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 yeah, so and we consider this view to be highly problematic. And they're not discrete. It's kind of going back to like the Jimmy Savage, not Randy Savage, the Jimmy Savage small world, big world, large world thing, where the very defined like context and stuff. And so he's making this Jogi's making this argument saying, oh, computation is far too small world and too, whereas things just aren't that way. That's sort of his argument. And we were kind of getting like we were starting to get more towards the interesting, I think basically I'll try to look here, see if we put anything. I don't think we did. We were basically getting to, yeah, we did. Okay. We're trying to get to like what did he actually say? Like what's his outside of just saying, okay, we don't like this, we don't like this, what was he getting at in terms of what he wanted to say was the case, and sort of not just yeah. Oh yeah, he was talking. Then we got into this bit about like he started using these like interesting terms, organizational closure, right, and then other kinds of organizational closure as closure of constraints, self-constraint.
Okay, I was back for this part of the conversation, I think.
Yeah, we did. This is what we did last time.
Yeah. Okay.
So there wasn't really much to.
Yeah. So I mean, because we've been talking about a lot of this, the physical computation discussion we had last year, and we talked a lot about the Church-Turing thesis and physical computation, which is actually, there are a lot of different strands there, which probably some of them aren't relevant here, but actually, they kind of are, because you have that computational view, and that's not the only view of, like, say, intelligence. You have other, you have in biology, it's one view, and then there's this view. And then, what is the link to, say, like something like physical computation? And I think actually it came out of this sort of debate where, when you say computation is life computational, is the brain computational, and depends on how you define computation. So, okay, if you take Church-Turing, that's a definition of computation. You can go beyond Church-Turing, though, and have another definition of computation. And then whatever we're talking about here is, so that's, I guess, not compatible with Church-Turing. So it's, but it still may be computational in a way that's not really defined as of yet. That's what I'd like to dig into. Actually, I'd like to dig into two things. One is, of course, the anticipatory systems. And then the other is the stuff that the Jimmy Savage stuff. So Jimmy Savage was like a small player in the Macy conferences in Cybernetics. I think we talked about this in the Slack, where, he was kind of more, I guess, statistically oriented. I think he had a statistical background. Mm-hmm. And, I haven't read a lot of his stuff. I know it hasn't come up in our readings of Cybernetics, but nevertheless, he was there and he had some things to say. So, like, I'd be interested to see where he comes from on that. And, what is because, I mean, the Macy's conference people didn't all have the same set of views.
No, it was, yeah. I have read quite a few of those papers now. They're very different from each other.
Yeah. So, yeah, we like to focus on the one view, or, well, I think most of Cybernetics is remembered for the one sort of Norbert Wiener view, which we have gone over quite a bit. And so what are the other views, and like how are they? And of course, we've been doing this with the ecology of the brain, or I guess the brain or the mind. And so but there are other. I guess there are other kinds of. It's actually quite heterogeneous. So, or steps to the ecology of the mind, right? So yeah, I mean that's so those are the two things of, I guess, to follow up on too is
Well, what was the first one? I know Amanda wrote Jimmy Savage and Small World,
right.
etc.
The other one was like the anticipatory systems.
Oh yeah, okay.
So like having like these.
Okay. Yeah. th- there's also a bunch of stuff on memory that I've just made a channel in the Discord that I want to put there because it keeps being a bunch of things on memory. We don't have to cover that here. I'll just say, oh, yeah, I'll just leave it at that. Cool. Okay, let's go back to this. All right. Yeah, so we were.
I appreciate the refresher.
Yeah.
Well, there's the MR stuff. Yeah. Can we get to this part yet? The limits of computation, I forget, or I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
that's like all the that's what we were just talking about basically. It's like the criticisms of what's out there before he gives his own account of what's out there.
I feel like I keep thinking of Yogi's position as basically, he said it in that conference, and I keep coming back to Yogi, the main author's position is basically, well, if we don't understand how it works in biology and we take it to a computational system we don't fully understand, we're not doing anything. We're not getting anywhere. I think that's not the greatest. That's a very, a bit of a straw man of his take, but I think that's sort of. I'm curious what he's trying to do. I think it's his criticism, and I'm curious what is he trying to build here. He's talking about Rosen stuff, okay, and where is he continuing to go with it? FA systems, okay,
No, that's the other type, FA.
yeah.
I can't remember. It's Hoffmeyer though, and that's the other person who is kind of picked up. So it's the other example, and I wonder if there are other examples of these kind of systems. So FA is like, I can't remember what it stands for, but
Fabrication assembly.
oh right, yes.
That sounds similar.
Well, yeah.
MR.
So the difference here, I guess, is in a lot of nanosystems, we're interested in self-fabrication. Like, we can't, in a lot of molecular biology, there's this fabrication of parts. So like if you have things like a bacterial rotor or some set of proteins that are doing some functional job, like, transcription or translation, they get put together and built. They're kind of like a machine, but they're, have to be self-assembled. There's this whole field of self-assembly in nanotech and in molecular biology and molecular engineering that is sort of is sort of maybe a subset of Rosen's systems, MR systems. But MR systems are, obviously broader, and they include, like a metabolic set of metabolic pathways and reactions and that sort of thing. So, I mean, they both share that sort of aspect of they have to have this self-organizing aspect where the parts come together, and they have to have, I guess you could say they have a program behind them. But I think that I know that Yogi's position on genetic programs and especially in development is that we don't have genetic programs, which, there's a language in developmental biology usually people talk about when, you go from like gene expressions to an embryo to like stripes in an embryo or some sort of tissue formation in an embryo. People say that there's a genetic program for X, some module maybe for some segment of the phenotype. And, that's it implies some sort of computation, first of all. It implies an algorithm or a set of instructions. and it implies that you can run through the program and then modify the program as you want, so there's this computational metaphor. And so, if that's true, then we should be able to do that. And, this is something that they talk about actually in the Levin and Bongard paper. I mean, that's kind of an assumption, is that, or at least a part that we can draw from, is that there are these programs that we can manipulate, and that, a biological machine is something, we can manipulate at that programmatic level and interface with actual maybe mechanical machines or other types of machines. But at the same time, that biology kind of follows that same logic. What we're talking about here is that those are fundamentally different things, that there is no kind of gene expression program or developmental program, that there is this process of like self-assembly, self-organization, and that they're tied up in that spiral. So, you start off somewhere, and then the system is self-perpetuating, and, sticking a piece of technology in there or manipulating it might not give you the desired effect. It might give you the desired effect. And, I guess, I don't know if there's any real test of it. I mean, you could say, well, synthetic biology might be able to test that, because you can actually manipulate the parts. But I don't know if that's necessarily the case. But it's worth thinking about. Yeah, because you could knock out specific genes in a hypothetical program, so you could actually see the effects of that. And of course, when we do gene knockouts now, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you get, you remove the gene dosage. Sometimes there are copies of the gene that, contribute different copies of the transcript. So the knockout is incomplete in that sense. So yeah,
right, there's redundancies.
Yeah, there are a lot of redundancies in the genome. In bacterial genomes, it's kind of hard to see this because they're so optimized that you actually don't have a lot of redundancy. But in animal genomes and plant genomes, it's a little bit different, especially when you get into, like multicellular genomes and so forth. So, yeah, there's a whole group of things here that I talked about that are kind of interesting and kind of related to this argument. But I think it's a really interesting hinge, because a lot of people, not only in like AI, but in synthetic biology, think, well, yeah, there's a program, we can manipulate it. We can have like these controllable systems, and we can program systems for cells, for all sorts of things. And then there's this other view that says, no, that's not really the way things are, or that there's a different way of viewing it.
And so it seems like that second view, and like maybe the main argument here, is that the things that look like programs are actually very flexible. They respond to the environment in a certain way. They're not fixed. Like there's supposed to be something. It's like that they change. The argument from Yogi is supposed to be that like there's a special kind of flexibility of the things that look like programs, maybe. And that's supposed to mean that ultimately organisms aren't programmatic in that way. They're not computational. But one feeling that I still have after reading this is like, it's right at the top of what's on Notion right now. Is there something that, some rules that govern the flexibility, and like when the program, like we see in organisms like constant change, and a lack of fixedness, and therefore it seems like a lack of fully programmatic behavior, according to this argument. But why can't there be just like a higher level of laws of like if-thens that determine things like the type of flexibility that organisms are, or something, that organisms have? So in that quote that was above in Notion, in the pink, I think. Sorry, I just want to see exactly what it said. Attributes, something about attributes. Maybe it wasn't in the pink. Oh yeah, there we go. Neither fitness nor, sorry, the bottom of the pink.
Oh, whoops, sorry. Yeah, here we go.
Neither fitness nor relevance have any universal attributes. Okay, but fitness and maybe something like fitness is the thing that's universal, and why can't that be computational?
Yeah, that's actually a good question. Why can't fitness be computational?
Even if it would be like a higher level thing that we have incomplete access to. So I understand why it would be like difficult, but why is it definitely not computational? Because that's what this paper's trying to argue, is like there's some layer of it that like, yeah, it can't be programmatic in this way. But I was left feeling like, well, all the objections, all the things that they cited as things that can't be computational, I feel like you just define computational a little differently, and then sure.
Right.
Yeah.
It kind of makes it like, I think, I don't know Levin very well, but I feel like that's why Levin's sort of a target here, in the sense of, well, Levin's like, well, there are some top-down things that do have, legitimate top-down influences that can recruit, that can offer some like a downstream regulation and like limit some developmental or possibility space because of that. And so I was like, yeah.
Yes. So this actually also brings us into artificial life, where people were actually trying to like simulate life. And there's, of course, the AVIDA platform, which is a program that, it uses a model of the circular bacterial genome, and it has this model of a Turing complete genome that the organisms evolve, and you can actually study like kind of maybe sort of fitness being computational, because everything is computational in the model, but then it has these lifelike qualities, including this fitness criterion. So we haven't, I don't know, we've not talked about that in the group, but it's interesting to revisit, because Christoph Adami, who is one of the originators of AVIDA, has written about that extensively. He has a textbook on AVIDA, and he's written a number of papers, not only on AVIDA, but on sort of, how sort of the computability of the genome and stuff like that. So I'll have to go back and look at some of the stuff he's worked on, if he actually addresses that question. Because that's sort of central to. It's not like there's nothing in the world that we can see. People tried to answer that question, because I think people have. I don't know if Charles Ofria has done anything on that either. He's another person who worked on AVIDA when they developed it at Caltech in the 90s. But yeah, there it is. So this is So this is the AVIDA platform, and this is just like, you can download this and run this on your computer, and you can like actually look at these genomes. You like seed it with an initial genome, and the genome is actually a set of computational commands. So they're like things almost like what Levin talks about with competencies. Each base is like an instruction. It's a machine instruction, and you walk through the genome of an organism, and it does, goes through the order, and it can do things in its environment. So if it's kind of like a bacteria. Is it going to synthesize this thing in the environment or not? If it doesn't synthesize this thing in the environment, then it can't survive. The organisms with a genome that allows it to synthesize the resources in the environment then live to the next generation, and they reproduce, and they outcompete one another depending on what their competencies are in their genome. So depending on the structure of the genome, then that gives you like their ability to survive. And so you can do all sorts of things in these environments and look at, but basically at its core, that's what they're kind of doing, is they're, basically saying, okay, here's a grid, here's some organisms, they have a genome. The genome has instructions that say, you can do this, you can synthesize this resource. And the resources are all computational resources. So they're not like actual like chemical substances. They're, like, can you perform this computational task, which is a resource? And so you can see that, like, in that sense, you can address, and you can analyze these genomes too. So you can see that, like, in a sense, well, fitness may be computational in that sense. Of course, these aren't real organisms, but you can make the parallel between, like, a Vidian genome and, like, some very simple bacterial genome, or even a viral genome, where they have, a DNA that does something, a DNA sequence or an RNA sequence, or whatever. Let's see some of what they have in their publications. I don't know if
This
they
is
have
really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, they have a really nice, like, this is great. I assume this is also part of Levin's inspiration for us, like, oh, you can, you'll make that thing where you can just type in some code and come out with this.
Well,
Well, this is much more like exploratory.
yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, this is really neat.
If you want to see any sections, go there.
Well, just the variety of I'm looking at the numbers, just the variety is so interesting.
Yeah.
This could be a good thing to return to for, well, I see memory. Our thoughts about memory. Yeah, what could memory look like in artificial life?
Yeah.
But then also, like, I know it feels like the methods project hasn't come up explicitly in a while. But like evaluating this type of thing as a method in cognitive science.
Yeah.
This type of, like, exploratory this type of coding, like the type of modeling maybe is what I'm looking for.
It hasn't been mentioned, but it's been on my mind quite a bit, especially since I'm looking at the agent-based modeling too, which is different than this. But I think that's absolutely right. Like, this should be like as a class, and then as this instance of the class, AVIDA.
Yeah.
Maybe another instance is Randall Beer's stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, like in the early days of A-Life, there was AVIDA, of course, and there were some other platforms. I think what Randall Beer was doing was an early instance of, like, working with agents. There's also other things like Tierra, which was Thomas Ray. There were a lot of different approaches. There've been a lot of different approaches like this where people have tried to use the genome as sort of this level of sort of modeling what organisms do or what they look like. So in AVIDA, the organisms are just these squares that have a genome, and they don't really have a phenotype, although I think people have worked on that a little bit in defining that. But, like, there are other models where you have phenotypes, like Randall Beer, of course, are interested more in embodied phenotypes. And then I think in Ray's Tierra, they have, like, a little bit more detailed phenotypes. But, again, the phenotypes are something that are very simple because, they're hard to model. You could model them specifically, and that's sort of what they do in actually sort of the robotics, the morphological computation stuff that we talked about a long time ago. And that's Josh Bongard's domain. But that's, this is like kind of a link between sort of like maybe the connectionist computationalist view and maybe some of the stuff from these, the biological complexity view, if we want to call it that. So there is this in between space there, and I think that maybe it's interesting to look in that space and see, given this debate about is computationalism like incomplete, or can you approach these questions with computation, or are you missing something or whatever?
Yeah, sort of like what can you or should you do with computation, and sort of think even it'd be nice to see some sort of a visualization of sort of the extreme, like the spectrum. Like, you have yogi on one side, and it takes a hard stance, but sort of, leaves opening in a specific way of like, well, this happens, and this isn't computational, but there's sort of this, you know, can we change the definition of computation to fit that space or not? And you have different approaches, yeah. um, yes. Okay. Do we want to look more at AVIDA or go back to the text?
Let's go back to the text for now. Although I don't know if I have anything more to add necessarily. Oh, I had one other thought. So they talk about autonomy a lot, in a few different senses. It seemed to me, I felt like I didn't have a solid grasp on what autonomy was supposed to be. I'm more familiar with what Levin means by it, and so so an organism has various levels of organization, and for Levin, each one has a kind of autonomy, and that's what allows like flexible goal-directed behavior. We don't have to consciously think about the chemical reactions in our body,
Right.
but I guess what is the relationship between that and like conscious control? Because consciousness was also like, the word was dropped a few times in the paper, usually next to cognition. And I think at one point they say like, oh, we're not going to get into the details of what we think consciousness is. But it seems like there's autonomy in the Levin sense of how a physiological system can be autonomous. But then there's like free will. And they seem like, according to this view, that those are the same type of thing. But like, how is that right? Are those the same type of thing? Like, would our like true autonomy be the same kind of property, just applied to our like consciousness? I don't know. I was trying to figure out how to connect that, because we like, and also how that connects to agency. Although I think that's just what I mean by like conscious control. I don't know. I don't have a particular question. That was just one thing I was thinking about.
Mm-hmm.
I also have a comment on this footnote 12. And we talked about this, but I want to go back to it.
Mm-hmm.
So this is an alternative explanation can be provided in terms of the free energy principle, and this is Keverstein and Sims. So we talked about Keverstein as a person who's been on the active inference live stream, and so we know the free energy principle, and which defines a set of minimal principles of organization for systems capable of adapting to their environments in terms of their capacity to minimize free energy. That's seek out a path of least resistance. That's actually sort of right, but there's also this aspect of like that free energy, everything is about like minimizing the paths to sort of an answer. So like, if you think back to the allostasis paper that we've been talking about in Cognition Futures, there's this view of like having a bunch of options in front of you and then minimizing the path to a single option. So like, you have a lot of viable, an organism might have a lot of viable, like a variational set of strategies that it might pursue. And to know which ones are best, it would do this sort of energy minimization to collapse it down to maybe a single option. So there are a lot of viable options, you pick one. That's kind of what free energy is doing. So it's not quite, that everything is being optimized. It's that you're trying to find a way forward and evaluate that. So that's sort of the way, but anyways, that's one view, right? And then he says this can be interpreted, this can be interpreted as a simple instantiation of anticipatory behavior, which is the anticipatory systems. So with MR, you have metabolism and reproduction, or repair, for example. And metabolism repair is basically where you have a metabolism going on. You have this repair process going on, and it leads to more metabolism, and there's this loop. And I guess that is linked into the free energy principle, where you have a loop that's sort of minimizing free energy. There's no beginning or end. It's just kind of going in a loop. And the whole point is to sort of refine itself and minimize the free energy to find like one viable path out of a number of paths. So in metabolism, it's notorious for being multi-pathed, it's a multi-way type thing. And then finding like the one path that you can take, the system kind of collapses into that. So that's the view. We could call that like a variational view as well, because that's kind of what it is. You have all these variants and you're kind of selecting down, which is not, he talks about selection being kind of, I don't know. I mean, that there are links to selection there, but however, this explanation remains embedded in algorithmic or small world framework, as we discuss in the conclusions. So we might go to the conclusions in a minute, but I want to make a point about the small world. So, I mean, his view of algorithmic is small world, meaning that if you have an algorithm, there are a certain number of behaviors that you can generate with the algorithm. You can't generate any possible behavior, but it's a set of behaviors. So if I had a set of symbols that were interacting, there are a set of things that it can do, like a finite set of things. And whether that finite set of things allows you to model every possible thing in that exists in the real world. So if I model my real world with an algorithmic system, it's good, my algorithm might generate a bunch of options, but maybe it's not the one that's actually you would see in the biological system given those same conditions. And so he calls that small world because an algorithmic system is like a subset of anything that can happen, and that's why they call it incomplete. But there's this other thing about like small world versus, I guess, big world, and I found this when I was reading through some of some of the cybernetic stuff. That there's this. They talk about cybernetic systems as being big and really big. Like, Stafford Beer tried to model like, huge firms and nation states and things like that. And, making the claim that, in cybernetics, you can control such systems. And, it sort of modeled it after the brain, which you can also think of the whole brain as like a system like that's really big in terms of its components. It's big in terms of its scope. And so I find this interesting, and I don't know, I couldn't find the right thread in the cybernetics literature to follow on this. But there's definitely this contrast between like a small world that's self-contained and a big world that is like what cybernetics maybe was trying to do, but I couldn't find anything on it. I'm kind of stuck on that. I'm interested in it. I don't know if we can knock the door down on that.
Is it a big world that was connected, or what word did you use for that?
Well, I mean, all I know is that like there are some oblique mentions in the cybernetics literature that there being like these big systems. So cybernetic systems are not like maybe not tractable systems, but big systems.
Mm-hmm.
There's a suggestion that that's what people meant in some sense by cybernetic. It was like, okay, I can control a small system with like control theory, but a big system, a really complex system, needs a cybernetic solution. So I could, like, if I were one human, I could like make maybe with my own kind of, no computer, say, I could make some predictions about things. But with a computer, especially if I'm interfaced with a computer, like what Norbert Wiener was talking about, or interfaced with media, I can make much larger decisions. I can have a much larger system, a scope of a system that I can draw from. So, I mean, there's something there, and I don't know what it is.
Okay, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
I also don't know what to like cite for that, but I know what you mean now.
yeah,
Because I mean, you could easily say like Project Cyberside, like
yeah,
is was an attempt at that specifically,
yeah,
and that was a thing, and there's reasons to support that, and that's partly why people didn't. It's like, oh, it's controlled economy, it's communism, like that kind of stuff. That comes from somewhere. But even outside of like that, you know, instantiation, I guess, um, the theory itself has there's things there, and I'll see if I can, I don't know,
yeah.
drum up.
I think Ashby maybe made some oblique references to it, but I don't. I couldn't. Ashby has so much stuff that he wrote. I don't know, but like, it's maybe embedded, and of course the Jimmy Savage thing. Also, I think Jimmy Savage had like a bit to say about that, but again, I couldn't find much on what Jimmy Savage was saying because he didn't publish a lot of stuff that I was able to find.
I have a question that's tangent to all this and unrelated, but I think I'm going to save it till the very end. Um, I'll say more of that later. But like, I don't think we're totally at the conclusion part yet. I don't think six is the conclusion, or is it? To live is to know. I guess since we're basically almost out of time, do we want to try to talk anything here or synthesize this, or like read the conclusion, talk about it for a little bit, and read and then go into something else next time? I don't know how people are feeling about that.
I want to do something else next time, and I feel like we've covered the whole paper, even
Yeah,
if we haven't like actually gone through all of it.
Yeah, I
I mean,
don't
I don't
know.
want to like stop anyone from developing an idea further,
The
but
discussions may be continued in the Slack channel.
yeah,
but I do feel like we've talked about a lot that is still is toward the end of the paper. I guess that's what a conclusion often is like a summary. Um, yeah, I would love to do Rosen for next time. I sent a link into the Slack,
Excuse me.
or it's not by Rosen, it's about Rosen.
That's great. I like honestly, if it was up to me, like I feel like I feel like everything should just be like supply a context first for this stuff.
oh yeah,
Um, not and that we have to do that, but I feel like I I have I don't know if I can call them colleagues, but a lot of people who are looking into like ways to just do education differently. And that's having a conversation about that earlier. Like, yeah, here's the thing, but also supply the context. And I'm Frontier Map is still happening too. But anyway, yes, I'm happy to do that next time. Here is what the link it's just it's Louis talking about Rosen's anticipatory systems.
yeah.
So there we go.
An expository introduction. So
Okay.
So, anything else about the conclusion that we want to wrap up? I mean, there was a lot of stuff here, but is there anything that we can? Looks like they talk about sort of their position on this debate between computationalism and relevance realization, and that you can't do everything with algorithms. It's just not compatible. That we have like uh, different philosophical grounds on which we base this. Um, Computational rationality, which is where you can't use that as a sufficient basis for general intelligence. So, computational rationality, so rational reasoning meets formal optimization under certain cognitive resource constraints. So, I guess there's this issue of optimality and optimization that they don't like, but also the connectionist aspect that it doesn't fully represent intelligence. Um, yeah, really kind of like fighting all these like citations here, Hirschman and yeah, and then Quite the opposite. We've shown here that the basic foundation of natural agency and cognition, and therefore anything we could reasonably call intelligence, cannot be computational at all. Okay, so that's because I guess it doesn't give you, like, if you have a Bayesian model, there's no way you can make like you can weight a prior in an appropriate way because there are things that are outside of the bounds of your symbolic system or your statistical system that give you the ability to model this. So, the dream of generating purely algorithmic systems able to think and act like human beings remains a pipe dream because purely symbolic machines exist in small worlds in which there is no problem of relevance to be solved. And so that is I think it boils down to the argument where you have these symbolic machines, they interact, but they give you the small set of sort of complete answers or a small set of options, and you have to have this sort of beginning, this relevance, or what the system finds relevant, and a feedback that is sort of self-perpetuating, and that's at least part of it. There's just so much here that you could dig into, as Jesse says, but yeah. So we'll take that lesson, I think, going forward. That's good.
Yeah, that's a good thing to end on. Because I guess the question that I still have is why can't why can't the missing special sauce be computational?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and I don't know the answer. I don't think anyone does. That's why,
Well, yeah, because part of how we would try to answer it is to look to what our current computers can do. Like that helps determine how we think of computation.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, I'm actually reminded of the paper that I never fully did, or the presentation I fully did about analogies, because I feel like this is actually almost like in some ways, and we're at the top of the hour, but I'll just say, like, in some ways this feels like what's your analogy for the mind, and how close to computer is it or not? Like, I understand there's rigorous things going on here about computation, or like attempting to be rigorous, I guess, and saying, okay, computation is this, and here's the limitations of computation. You got to have your IDE, you got to have your small world setup, and you can't break, you can't. This is irreducible, sure, okay, but at the same time, there's also this bit of like, a machine is this, computation is that, and because of it, I have this stance, and it's almost like more of a statement. It actually feels a bit like basically a normative stance on what a machine is and what computation is, rather than other things. But I don't have much articulation, probably in general, but especially right now, and where time is up. So.
Yeah, I have one more thing to say, though, is the interesting point to end on, which is that our computers that we use today are based on a von Neumann architecture. Of course, von Neumann was, very, very smart, and he did a lot of things thinking about this, and he built, modern computers based on sort of what was practical. But he also had these this thing that he worked on called the theory of self-reproducing automata. And he thought of he didn't just think about like the mind or the computer as a mind, but he thought about cellular automata as sort of these sort of artificial life systems where you have different parts and a discrete model that can model different like parts of an organism, like muscles and connective tissue. I was just into this recently. That's why I kind of am thinking about it. But it's really, it's a little hokey, but it's a really interesting thing when we talk about modern computers as being like the brain. It's like, okay, that's a von Neumann architecture. So A, we could have other architectures for computation, but B, even von Neumann thought of different architectures for things that were more biological. And so what do those look like? I would be very interested to do a deep dive into that, but that's for another time.
Yeah, cool. No, me too. That sounds really cool.
Okay, great. And then in the chat, I'll mention my comment about documenting writing different subjects because I feel this pressure of like I have to make things so people aren't going to know what I'm talking about at all, and it's not just going to be preprints and papers. So to be continued.
Okay.
Thanks very much for everything today, and looking forward to picking up next week, and also for Christian Futures next week. It's been not happening, but I plan to do that there, and I look forward to being healthy. So I'll see you all next time.
Yeah.
Thanks.
See you next time. Thanks.
That's easy.
Talk to you soon. Bye.